They send 4. 7 back. Rodgers fires over the middle. Caught. Adams. Rodgers fires. Caught.
You got to go.
32. He gives himself up. Crosby to try to win it. And the kick is good to win the game.
How can you not be romantic about football, man?
Welcome back, everyone. It's David. Week 3 of the NFL is in the books, and it was easily the best one yet. The 2 preseason favorites, the Chiefs and Buccaneers, both lost. Justin Tucker, already the greatest kicker of all time, still somehow found a way to outdo himself. And no matter how much dysfunction he may cause, or add to from what was already there, Aaron Rodgers reminded us all that he's still Aaron Rodgers. And there's nothing that any of us can do about it. Through 3 weeks of the season, the only thing that's clear is that we know nothing. But we can do our best to figure out by making sweeping statements that will almost definitely not hold up a week from now. If you like what you see, be sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a follow on social media. First up, the Seahawks are cooked. Usually, they give their fans the satisfaction of playing well in the first round and setting up sky-high expectations before imploding in on themselves. But this time around, they've cut right to the chase. Last week, we saw them blow a huge lead at home to the Titans in spectacular fashion. But it's one thing to have Derrick Henry run all over you in one half. The Vikings didn't even have Dalvin Cook. The fact that Alexander Mattison could come in from the cold and easily rack up over 100 rushing yards tells you all you need to know about the Seahawks' run defense. They also managed to make Kirk Cousins look like he's actually the best quarterback in his division. As for the offense, they only showed up for the first half yet again. This is no recipe for success. Their punt on 4th and 7 in the fourth quarter was effectively waving the white flag. At 1 and 2, there's no chance the Seahawks can win their division now. The Rams looked like world beaters, and the Cardinals managed to pick up another win despite an average by his standards game from Kyler Murray. Even the Niners are good at the things the Seahawks defense has struggled with, stopping the run and covering the middle of the field. I mean, do you really trust anyone on the Seahawks to slow down George Kittle? After a string of disappointing seasons, Seahawks fans have been dreaming of the day the Pete Carroll era finally comes to an end. But if they keep this up, that could happen sooner rather than later. But speaking of the Seahawks' next opponent, it's easy to get lost in Aaron Rodgers' latest heroics, but let's analyze this from a Niners perspective. There's an easy scapegoat for why they lost, and it's not who you think it is. Kyle Shanahan let this one get away by making too many costly errors and gifting Rodgers too many opportunities. After a first half which saw the Niners fall behind 17-0 and the offense couldn't move the ball, everyone was screaming for Trey Lance to come in. He finally did on the last play, scoring a touchdown on the goal line and helping provide the spark the team needed to make their comeback. But before that, the Niners faced a 4th and 1 situation at the Green Bay 49. They could have brought in Lance then and there to run the same play they did in his first touchdown to get the first down, but instead, they elected to give the ball back to Rodgers, who proceeded to make it 17-0. Then there was the final drive, which saw Garoppolo impressively orchestrate a touchdown in the 2-minute drill, although George Kittle was a big part of that. Imagine how much better this Niners offense would be if he got more than 9 targets a game. When Kyle Juszczyk eventually scored, any sane person knew what the final outcome was going to be when they saw how much time the Niners left on the clock. Juszczyk, on his part, seemed like he did try very hard to not get into the end zone. But knowing that the Packers had no way of stopping the clock, what are the Niners thinking, snapping the ball with 12 seconds left on the play clock? Perhaps that's on Jimmy G, but it's also on Shanahan to let him know not to rush it in that instance. Andy Reid routinely got killed for his lack of clock management late in games. There's no reason Shanahan should be getting a pass on this. And after all the talk last week about how the best way to beat a Brady or a Rodgers or a Mahomes is to keep them off the field, this is a prime example of how not to do that. While Niners fans are anxious for the day that the Trey Lance era can finally begin, Garoppolo has played well enough so far to hold on to the job. And while he had his fair share of mistakes in this one, he wasn't the biggest reason his team lost. But even when that day comes, it's fair to question if Kyle Shanahan is really the right person to lead him. Next up, Ben Roethlisberger is QB 32. And that might be too generous. It's clear now that the Steelers' Week 1 win over the Bills was an outlier, on both sides. The Bills are who we thought they were, while that win has proven to be fool's gold, because in 2 straight games at home, the Steelers have looked flat. In fairness, we knew that the Steelers didn't win that game because of Ben Roethlisberger. He barely connected on half of his 32 passing attempts for 188 yards and had a QB rating of 83.9. Their 2 touchdowns that game came from having a short field and a blocked punt. Against the Bengals, though, Roethlisberger reverted back to his gunslinger tendencies that doomed them in last year's playoffs. He threw it 58 times and only had 1 TD and 2 interceptions to show for it. His QB rating on the day was 70.9. Now, is it all his fault? No. His offensive line is porous, and the coaching staff's offensive scheme is very predictable. But Roethlisberger's situational awareness is completely shot. Look at this ball that was thrown into triple coverage. What other outcome could he have possibly hoped for on that one? Just like with the Seahawks, the Steelers at least gave their fans the courtesy of letting them down in the early part of the season rather than giving them false hope to cling to. But their path to the playoffs is murky at best. All the other teams in the AFC North have quarterbacks that are capable of leading their teams to playoff berths. The only thing Roethlisberger seems capable of leading is an early retirement. Considering he's the only QB from that famed 2004 draft class that's still playing, he's definitely due. Next up, the Kansas City Chiefs are not winning their division. That being said, it's definitely not time to panic if you're a fan, but last place in their own division is not something I would have ever thought we'd see from them, especially in September when Mahomes never loses. There was lots of talk in the preseason about, will the Chiefs be the first ever 17-0 team? But if they couldn't beat the Chargers at home in a game that the Chargers seemed destined to throw away from repeatedly shooting themselves in the foot, then that's not a good sign for their long-term outlook. Even in the one game that they did win this year, they looked vulnerable and were outplayed for long stretches. You could also argue that their overconfidence against the Ravens was what did them in, and it's hard to recover from committing 4 turnovers in a game like they did here. On offense, they're too talented to not figure it out. Even in a loss, they managed to rack up 437 yards, but while there's no such thing as a good turnover, the ones the Chiefs had were very poorly timed. 2 fumbles in the red zone, both of which led to Chargers touchdowns, plus another interception late in the game that led to the go-ahead score. Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now is the most hated person in all of Kansas City. As for the defense, sure, they were put in a bad position on account of the 4 turnovers, but Herbert was able to move the ball on them at will. The secondary looked lost and had no answers for either Mike Williams or Keenan Allen. Only getting 1 sack hurts too. This Chiefs pass rush really misses Frank Clark. And in the end, it was the Chargers' 2 4th downs that made the difference. Converting on the 4th and 4, right here, gave them all the confidence they needed in order to beat the Chiefs. While this 4th and 9 play should have been a routine stop, if not for Daniel Sorensen, who's likely the 2nd most hated person in all of Kansas City. As far as adversity goes, the Chiefs have bounced back from worse. But this is the most vulnerable they've looked in years, and the Sharks are starting to circle. You've got to think the other teams in this division have faith that they can win it this year. Finally, number 1, and the most noteworthy thing we saw this week, was the absolute beating that the rookie QBs took. Between Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, and Justin Fields, they threw 2 touchdown passes, 7 interceptions, and got sacked 14 times. Of course, Fields is responsible for 9 of those 14 sacks, which is why the Bears need to fire Matt Nagy, if for no other reason than for the sake of Fields' long-term health. I mean, if your justification for not starting him in week 1 was to protect him from Aaron Donald, why would you then trot him out against Myles Garrett? Every time Fields scrambled out of the pocket, his eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. Once the offense looked as dull and as ineffective as it did with Dalton under center, everyone knew who to blame. Now, granted, that's not to say that Fields gets a pass. The concerns that scouts had over his processing time seem to be warranted. But what happened to him is far more of an indictment on Matt Nagy than Fields. No QB should be expected to thrive in that offensive scheme. Hell, even if the Bears did the right thing and drafted Mahomes, his first start would have probably gone something like this if he was left to fend for himself behind that O-line. Because of what we've seen from the rookie QBs this week and this season, I don't blame Shanahan for not going to Trey Lance yet. We've also seen what the 49ers look like when someone other than Garoppolo is under center, and yeah, it's not pretty. The fact of the matter is you can't expect a rookie to come in right away and play like a stud. QBs are only part of the solution. You need to have the right system in place for him and a proper amount of protection. If you need evidence, look no further than how Sam Darnold and Ryan Tannehill have played after they left Adam Gase. Nothing, though, is worse than this headline. Bears coaches have been designing a playbook for Justin Fields since he was drafted. On Sunday, they'll unveil an offense that will be worlds different than the one Andy Dalton ran. Either that's the biggest lie you've ever heard, or that really was a different playbook, but neither option reflects well on Nagy. Every day spent with Matt Nagy as the head coach of the Bears is a day wasted. Please hire Eric Bieniemy, Chicago. He's way past due for a head coaching job. Well, anyway, that does it for this week. See you all for week 4, where... Does anyone know of any interesting matchups to look forward to? I can't think of any.